Today we'll talk about using the 4-jaw chuck on the mini lathe. And if you're new to the hobby, you may wonder about why you'd want to use a 4-jaw chuck versus a 3-jaw chuck. And that's what we'll talk about. So let's get started. For those of you who already have mini lathes or have been reading up on them, know that the standard chuck that comes with the mini lathe is a 3-jaw universal. Most of the mini lathes have a 3-inch diameter chuck as standard. This particular one that comes from LittleMachineShop.com comes standard with a 4-inch diameter chuck. It has a 4-inch diameter spindle, but other than that, the chucks are pretty similar. And a universal chuck like this one is called a universal chuck because the 3 jaws move together in unison. So when you turn any of the 3 chuck key positions, all 3 jaws move in and out together, and so they automatically center and clamp on your work. And that's very convenient for about 80 to 90% of the work we do on the lathe typically. One of the main drawbacks of the 3-jaw chuck is that the 3 jaws don't come together exactly concentrically. Depending on the quality of the chuck, they may be concentric to within a few thousandths, maybe 3, 4, 5 thousandths. But the problem is if you're working on a workpiece and you have it clamped in the 3-jaw chuck, when you start turning, all of the turned material is concentric with the center line of the lathe. But if you then need to remove that work and flip it over to machine some features on the opposite end, those features will not be concentric with the machining that you already did on the first end. It will be off by whatever the variation in the centering of your chuck happens to be. On a very high quality chuck, that might be only 1/1000th of an inch or maybe even less if you're really lucky. But on a typical low-cost chuck like you might find on the mini lathe, it could be anywhere from maybe 2 to 3 thousandths and maybe even up to 7 or 8 thousandths. This particular chuck that came with this lathe is I think within about 5 thousandths, not particularly good. Now you can improve that somewhat by grinding the surfaces of the inside surfaces of the 3 jaws while they're in position, and I may do that as a demonstration in a future video. But by and large, due to variations in the scroll and just the quality of the machining on the jaws themselves, they will never meet exactly in the center, and therefore your work will never be exactly centered. It can be pretty close, but where you need tolerances of 1 or 2 thousandths of an inch or less, the 3-jaw chuck generally won't do it. Now there are very high quality and very expensive chucks available for larger lathes in which you can actually compensate for any variation. It's called a set true is a brand name for that type of chuck, but there are several brand names, but basically they all allow you to center the chuck on the back plate to compensate for any variation in the alignment. But those are generally not found on low-cost lathes like this one. Almost all of the 4-jaw chucks that you're likely to run into are, rather than being a universal chuck, they're called independent chucks, and that's because each jaw moves independently of the others. And there are 4-jaw universal chucks, but they aren't very common just because they aren't nearly as flexible and useful in some respects as the 4-jaw independent chuck. The advantage of the independent chuck, of course, is that you can individually adjust each of the jaws. So if you have a workpiece that needs to be exactly centered, you can adjust the jaws as needed while using a dial indicator to bring it right on center. On a 3-jaw scroll chuck, the jaws are numbered 1, 2, and 3 and have to be installed in that sequence. But on a 4-jaw chuck like this, the 4 jaws are identical, and so they can be installed in any slot and in any sequence. On a 3-jaw chuck, they typically have 2 sets of jaws, so-called inside jaws and outside jaws, whereas on the 4-jaw chuck, the same jaws are used, depending on which way you orient them, for either inside or outside clamping. Now you may have seen on my website that I like to use punch marks to mark the jaw numbers on my chucks, at least on the 3-jaw chucks, and I also do that on the 4-jaw chucks. On the 4-jaw, the sequence is not important, so it doesn't really matter in some respects which is jaw 1 or which is jaw 2, but where it's helpful is when you're centering work and you're working the number 2 jaw and the number 4 jaw up opposite each other, or the number 1 jaw and the number 3 jaw. Just makes it a little easier to make sure you're working with the jaw that you think you are. Well, I hadn't noticed it until I started working that I never had marked these, so I'm going to go ahead right now and just punch some holes here and mark these in sequence. So that's jaw 1, jaw 2, jaw 3, and jaw 4. I'll go ahead and reinstall the jaws now, but as I said, it doesn't really matter which jaw goes into which slot, but I'll show you in a little while where those punch marks are handy. So there's one, and I'm not even installing these in numerical sequence because it doesn't matter. It does matter on a 3-jaw chuck, or at least on a universal chuck, where the jaws are all coupled together by the scroll. When you're getting ready to chuck a piece of stock in the 4-jaw chuck, it's helpful if you first adjust the jaws so that they're pretty close to where they need to be, and you can just put your stock in there and kind of do it by eyeball. But you can also use these scribed circles on the front here as a guide to help you get the 4 jaws in approximately the same position, or you can look at the extent to which they protrude beyond the outside edge here of the chuck as a guideline. But we'll get them pretty close, and then we'll use the dial indicator to zero it. There are several different methods you can use to center the work in a 4-jaw chuck, and people tend to find a technique that they like and stick with it, and some people may argue that some are better than others, but I'll show you the method that I use, and if you like it, great, and if you don't like it, feel free to use a different method. But basically the idea is to get the stock to rotate so there's no run out, that is to say, as you rotate it, the needle stays in the same spot. Now with my dial indicator in place, I want to find get the work centered. So first I'm going to find the lowest point, and that's the point at which the needle is farthest counterclockwise. So right there, about the 70 mark, and that corresponds to, it's actually between jaw number 1 and jaw number 4, but I'll choose jaw number 4, and I'm going to loosen it just a little bit. Then I'm going to swing around 180 degrees to the number 2 jaw, and this is where the punch marks are handy, and I'm going to tighten that jaw. So by loosening jaw number 4, I created a space into which I can now push the workpiece down using jaw number 2, and that will bring the workpiece closer to center. Now we just repeat that process. So we rotate around until we find the low spot again, which is there. And now it's on the jaw number 1. So I'm going to loosen jaw number 1 to create some space. Come around 180 degrees and tighten jaw number 3. Now sometimes if you loosen it a little bit too much, you can overshoot. But that's okay. Just keep repeating the process and you'll eventually get there. So you find the low spot again. And this time it's jaw number 3, which tells me I did overshoot a little bit. So we'll loosen jaw number 3. Go back around 180 degrees to jaw 1, and we'll try that again. You can see if we now rotate it around, we're getting closer and closer to being on center. There's only about 7 or 8 thousandths of run out now. Okay, so we find our low spot once again, and it's between 3 and 2. I'm going to pick 2 here. We'll just loosen out a small amount, come around opposite that to jaw number 4. We'll tighten it a little bit. And let's see how we are now. Now we're even closer, I think. And not by much. Alright, find our low spot again. Jaw 3. Loosen it a little bit. And as you get closer, the amount that you want to loosen it, you have to loosen it less. In other words, you want less clearance as you get closer to the end point, because you're only making small incremental adjustments now. Okay, now we're close enough that rather than loosening the jaw, I'm going to find the high spot. So I wait and I turn it until it's as far clockwise as possible, and then I'm just going to tighten that jaw without loosening the opposite jaw, because we're getting pretty close now. And again, I find the high spot, and I'll tighten the corresponding jaw. It's jaw number 1. And we should be pretty close now. Let's put it under power and see how it looks. Okay, well, yeah, we're within about 2/1000ths now. So that's the process, and you can keep going and get it really pretty much as close as you want to spend the time doing it. So we'll tighten jaw 2 now. And we're very close. Okay, we're within 1/1000th now, which generally, that's good enough for most work. Now we could, if it was necessary for whatever we're making, if we were making some sort of a motor shaft and we wanted some features to be concentric on this side, then had to flip the workpiece over and make some concentric features on the other end of the workpiece, we might want to get this better than even 1/1000th. But to do that, we'd have to shift to a more sensitive indicator, and I'm not going to do that right now. We might look at that another time, though. Now, one thing you have to watch out for is as you're tightening the workpiece, you may have a situation sometimes where the two jaws that are clamping the work that are opposite the jaws where you're trying to adjust are so tight that the workpiece doesn't move evenly, and you can actually end up sometimes with the workpiece being slightly skewed, so it's not in a straight line along the center line of the lathe. So before you get ready to turn it, you might want to check carefully to make sure it's not loose or skewed in any way. And something else I often do is before I start turning, just go around all 4 chuck key positions, make sure the work is snug in there. Sometimes you'll find that one or maybe even more than one jaw is a little bit loose, and that can happen just through the process that we followed there. So particularly if it's a big and heavy workpiece that I want to be absolutely sure does not break free from the chuck, I will, after I get it centered to my satisfaction, I'll go around, tighten all 4 jaws, and then make one more pass to recenter it. That way I'm sure it's both tight and centered. But on a small, lightweight workpiece like this, that's not too big a concern, as long as a visual check looks okay. And of course, the other thing is, in this particular instance, I have plenty of surface area to grip the work here, but there are situations when you're working with larger diameter work where you may not be able to grip on the full width of the jaw. You may only have maybe half of the width of the jaw, or potentially even less, to grip on. You have to be very careful in a situation like that you have a very secure hold on the workpiece. Now with our workpiece centered, I want to turn it down a little bit. But before I do that, I'm going to use a facing cut on the end just to give it a clean end. I've got this particular lathe, I've made a carriage lock for it, so I've locked the carriage down to the ways so that the carriage doesn't shift while I'm making this facing cut. And we'll speed it up some. And that looks pretty good. This is the tool I used to make the facing cut. This is a sort of a general purpose shape that I use. It's suitable both for turning and facing. Now we'll make our turning cut, and I'm going to use power feed. So let's rotate the chuck around and see what the run out looks like. It should be pretty low, and in fact it is. So it's under 1/1000th of an inch, it looks like. You may recall, if you saw my earlier videos from 2017 on the use of the 3-jaw chuck, that once you take a turning cut, even if the workpiece had been slightly off-center to begin with, the resulting surface after the turning cut will be exactly concentric with the center line of the lathe. So that's what we're seeing here, and it looks nice and smooth. The problem was with the 3-jaw chuck, when we turned the work around to machine the other end, it was no longer concentric because the 3-jaw chuck itself was off by a few thousandths of an inch. But with a 4-jaw chuck, we can adjust it so that both ends are exactly concentric, which is important, for example, if you're making something like a motor shaft. Alright, I cut the end of that long workpiece off in my 4x6 bandsaw on the other side of the shop. It's quicker and easier just to take it over there and cut it off than to try to use a cutoff tool. First thing we need to do is get this approximately lined up here. And let's go back to our dial indicator. During this adjustment process, we use this rough unfinished surface here, but our goal is to have this end that we're going to work on here concentric with the work that we previously did on the opposite end. So I'm going to need to indicate off of this finished section. So we'll go through our zeroing process once more. That's our low spot there. I'll loosen jaw 3 just a little bit. And by a little bit I mean like a 1/16 of a turn maybe, because these are, when you get this close, it doesn't take much. Okay, you can see there's less than 1/1000th of run out there, probably about a 1/2,000th it looks like. Good enough. And here again I'll make a quick facing cut. Of course, this isn't a real workpiece for anything, so I'm just going to imagine that for whatever reason, I need to turn this end down to a smaller diameter. Now, of course, if we were making an actual workpiece, we would be working against the plan and would need to turn this down to a specified dimension. Okay, let's turn the lathe on and see how it looks. It looks good. The real question is whether this new diameter is concentric with the diameter that we turned previously. Now let's see if we can get our indicator up there. It's kind of got a rough surface, so that may be difficult to do. Let's see if we can get the dial test indicator in there instead. This shoulder here is pretty rough, so I'm going to go ahead and do a cleanup pass on that just to get those burrs off of there so that don't interfere with our indicator reading. Now let's get this sensitive indicator on here and see what kind of result we get. I'm going to bring the probe tip down. And you can see we're getting about 2 to 3 tenths. Looks like there's some drift there, like it's the indicator is moving. But anyway, let's try that again. Okay, it looks like around 2 to 3 tenths of jitter there. If I smooth the surface a little bit with some wet dry sandpaper, a lot of that's just surface roughness, I think. So let me smooth that surface a little bit. That will reduce some of the residual, if there's any roughness there left over from the cutting tool, that will help. Okay, that looks pretty good. So as you can see, there's very little jitter there, just on the order of 1 or 2 tenths, maybe 3 tenths, but not too bad. Alright, well now, the critical test is to move the indicator up here onto the previously turned surface. This is where the dial test indicator can be an advantage. It didn't leave enough room there to get the regular dial indicator on that small shoulder that's sticking out. Alright, it's pretty close. It's looks like there's about 3/10 of variation there. So that's well under a thousandths. Not too bad as far as concentricity goes. Alright, well that wraps up our part one of our work with the 4-jaw chuck. And what we saw was that by using the 4-jaw chuck, we can work on both ends of a workpiece and make sure that the two ends are concentric with each other. So we'll look at some other features, capabilities of the 4-jaw in our upcoming videos. So until then, thanks for watching.